Hello, welcome back to a new video. So today we are going to make a small screencast. I was kind of surprised that yesterday's video about the a7 III was being watched so much, and I guess people liked it. Well, although I also got some negative votes, I'm always wondering why I get the negative likes. I'm guessing it's because I think they think the videos are too long. And today is probably going to be long again. So anyway, I wanted today to talk a little bit about more difference between the a7 III and the a7R III. This is not because I think or I want to defend my own buying habit of the a7R III, because I might actually also get an a7 III. But it's because I'm always interested in what did they change, how did they get the price lower, higher, what did they do and why. And it's just me, I kind of like filling with stuff, taking it apart, putting it back together and see what makes it tick. So as a result, I think I might have noticed a few things or recap some of the things that I've seen online. I must admit that I'm stealing parts from other people in the way that I took some screenshots from different well-known YouTubers. Thanks to Eric Rossi, because I think I took one of his screenshots. There's probably no better teardown than the one from Lens Rentals, which they did. So we got some screenshots from there, and also I took some stuff from Sony's materials, because if I can, I will speculate on a few things, but I will also, if I can, sort of show what I mean and what actually is being talked about. So let's get going. And so the way that I'm going to do is going to be very probably disorganized. I just put some screenshots in random order, and I will talk about them and flip between them to showcase what I'm talking about. The first things first, because I know I'm going to get this question again. Yes, these things or red things are from Peak Design. You can use them to add straps or cuffs to the side of your cameras. As you can see, I took off the little triangles. You can do that quite carefully, and they don't make noise anymore. So before I get the question, because that seems to be a very popular question, that's what they are. So let's get going, and like I said, I put them in a random order just to punch things out. So the first change that I made is they took out this port, which is the PC port for Flash. Actually, if you look at all three models, which kind of share the same body, which might become 4 if they also put the S3 in this model, is that this hole is basically being, let's say, reused on different cameras. Maybe on the motherboard also. I don't think so. I think they are using the same motherboard 3 times. But in this case it uses a PC port. On the A9 it has an Ethernet port here, which I would have preferred. And on the A7 they removed this port. They just left it blank. Right? So that's the first thing. That's a small difference. So let's go to the second one. This is I will flip around a little bit on this one. First thing I want to point out, if you're coming from a Canon or a Nikon or whatever, and they tell you that the mirrorless feels like a toy, this is what it looks like internally. I own both the A6000, A6300 and the A6500, and also there's quite a big price gap, and you notice that because of how it feels. And so just because you have once heard somebody, or you had it in your hand yourself, let's say A6000, it doesn't mean that the a7R III or the A7 or the A9 feels the same. And this is kind of also where the real, I think, first big difference comes in. And again, it's not about which one is better or is it better value or whatever, it's just pointing out differences. This is what an a7R III looks like internally. You can see it has an all magnesium body, basically almost like two bodies hidden inside. So this is the front part, this is the back part, which I'll get back to later, and this is the middle part that basically slides into this. And you can see how it all fits together, and there's basically almost no area where it doesn't have this metal going on. So it's basically a metal cage that's protecting the insides, and as a result it feels like a really solid rig. Now if you go, one of the things that we are hearing from people who are now at the Sony event and basically playing around with this camera for a few days, and that's where we are getting most of our information at the moment, is that one of the changes that they've made is that the backplate, so this part, is actually not magnesium anymore. So this is all a metal, magnesium, that they replaced this with a plastic part. Now, plastic does not mean bad, right? It might in fact be stronger in some areas. We have seen, at least I've seen, one person dropping his a7r III and it broke kind of like this on this part, because it dropped on this and it sort of split open this metal part. Because magnesium, although light and fairly strong, it can break in some ways that plastic won't break. The other side of this argument is that if this is indeed all plastic, which I think is now becoming obvious, that also means that it probably feels a little bit more, I wouldn't say plasticky, but more movement on the A7 compared to the a7r III, because you can see that also all the knobs part are basically put into this. So do we have proof for this? Well, if we go to this one, I took this screenshot from Eric's Rossi's video. You can see that this is what Sony is now displaying at the event about the build-up of the A7, so not the a7 III, right? And you can see that they're showcasing this inner part, they're showcasing this back part, but they are not showcasing the backplate, because, well, we kind of now know that it's made from plastic and it didn't want to showcase that for whatever reason, right? So I think it's quite clear that one of the things that they have changed is basically that this, and this is from the teardown from Lens Rentals, you can see that this part is basically now plastic and not like it is in this one, magnesium. So that's yeah, that might mean that you will feel a little bit more flex. I'm not sure if it has any other advantages. It might have some disadvantages in heat dissipation, because well, magnesium will be a better way to transfer heat, and so you get a bigger heat dissipation than if you make it from plastic. There might be some other advantages or disadvantages both ways. Of course, weight would be one of them, but at least now we kind of know that this is one of the ways they are saving money. I'm pretty sure it's a money issue by not making this part magnesium, but making it from plastic. So I do think that the top part, so this part goes into this part. You can see that on this image. So this part goes into this top part. It's very obvious that this part is still magnesium, so that part slides into that part. I don't think that's a big deal. So that's another change that we are seeing. Now let's go to this picture. So in this picture what you will see that the EVF, so I'm just, because I now see it, making a remark about it, the EVF has changed, right? So they probably put in the EVF of the A7 II and not the a7r III and the A9, again as a cost measure. This also means that probably one of the reasons why the battery is lasting a little bit longer, because the new EVF took more power than the old one, so that's another difference. Also, while we are here, we now know that the LCD on the back is different. So there's good news and bad news. The good news is, compared to all the other older cameras, it is showing the same behavior, which is an important one, because I think the a7 III is probably the best video camera overall of the of the Sony line now, but there was quite a big downside that if you went into 4K and you hit record, your screen would dim, or more precisely, what would happen, you can't use sunny mode anymore. And sunny mode is a bright mode that makes the screen much brighter, and that still works on the a7 III, which is a good thing. The bad thing is that I think it's probably, or it is the old screen and not the new screen, and the a7R III and the a9 both have a new type of screens which is a little bit brighter. It also has they call it, I think, a white something name, which resulted in a better sharpness and I think better whites. So the screen is not the same, but I do think it's probably a massive step up from the old screen. Both these result, and that is a pity, is that on the a7R III and the a9 it's probably easier to do manual focus because the EVF is better and the screen is better. So that's the downside. Again, not much we can say about that for the rest. Now, this is kind of an interesting area which we'll also get back to, because you can, let me see if I'm now doing it correctly. Yeah, it's the correct part. So this is, here you see the connections. These connections are all the same, and we'll see that on the motherboard that there is basically no changes. But this part is the optional part where they are either putting the nothing there, or they are putting a plug there for the audio jack, and they are putting a connector there for either Ethernet or for the PC port. So that's another area where there's changes. So let's, now that we are looking here, let's look at the motherboard, because that's quite interesting. So I took a few screenshots from there. So this is the motherboard from the a7R III, and I think it's also the motherboard for the a7 III and maybe even the a9. We don't have any internal pictures there. Now what's interesting here, you can see these two connectors here. There you have the optional part again. I think they might have just left one of them open if you're using the PC port, so they are not using it and they are reusing parts. Or it might be that this connector that they're using for the PC port. I'm not sure, I didn't look into it too much, but one of these connectors, my guess, is unused on the a7, while they are using it on the R3 model. So again, interesting. Now let's compare this motherboard to the one that we just got a picture from. So this is the one from the a7. Now you see only slight differences. I looked at them quite carefully. The biggest one is that you can see the Sony branding on here. I don't think that tells us anything, but it does make, it's mostly for PR, right? It's so that you think it's, you can see that it's Sony designed and Sony branded. Well, on the real model, so let's see if we have one here, you can see that the numbering is different. And when we get the pictures from the a7 internal motherboard, and if we can see the numbering on it, we can make a guess of what is happening here. Now here I'm going into a little bit of a, let's say, guess. I'm not sure if this is actually true, because we can't see the difference, and we might never see the differences. I think if you are looking at these two chips, which is basically a combination of the CPU, the LSI, and the memory, we know some things and we can guess some things, right? So one guess that I am making, and I don't want to start rumors, but I do think it's interesting to ponder what they are doing, right? I think they might have put in, well, we kind of already know that they put in less memory. So that makes sense. So it kind of has the same specs as the a7R III, but remember it's using about the half of the sizes, because we have 24 megapixels instead of 42 megapixels. Now, I am guessing that not only did they reduce the memory, but they also made changes to the LSI, which makes sense because they have a different sensor, they have different things that they need to take care of, so that makes perfect sense. So one of the chips might be different, although it's clearly on the same position on the motherboard and the same pin layout. And I'm here I'm going to guess, I would not be surprised if they are using either a lower grade CPU, and a lower grade means that it might be clocked differently, so a lower clock rating, which would mean less power use and less heat production, and that would actually make sense if they have lesser ways to, let's say, get rid of the heat because not the whole body is magnesium anymore, for example, or they just wanted to be safe because I don't think they need the speed. I think they either have clocked it lower or they're using the old version of the CPU. Would that make sense? Well, if you think about the numbers, it actually might make sense. And again, I'm just making a claim, I don't have any confirmation, I'm sort of guessing what they might have done to get to a lower price point and to get an overall good package, right? So if you look at the numbers, when the a7r3 and the a9 were released, they made the claim that the CPU is 1.8 times faster, right? So if you calculate the numbers, that means that if you go from 24 megapixels and you calculate it by 1.8, then you get to 43 megapixels. This is actually kind of the number that the a7r3 has. The same is kind of true with the a9. So if you say, well, but the a9 has the same number of pixels, so we need the same speed to get everything off the sensor and process it x amount of time a second. That is true, but notice that it's using 2 times the frame rate. So if you go into silent mode, it's 20 frames versus 10 frames. So actually that's also half. So there's quite a lot of, let's say, substantial evidence that the CPU inside the a7 doesn't need to run at full speed, or it doesn't have to be the same CPU, because they only need about half of the CPU power in some of the tasks that it's doing. Now, it does also need to do some more work in a way, because it has more focus points, and they tell us that the eye tracking is a little bit better compared to the other ones. We have no idea if this is just software optimization. Developers have had about a year from the a9 release to fiddle around with stuff, right? So they might have just optimized it. They might have used some of the, let's say, CPU power that they have left on that task. We don't know for sure, but I think it's also would not be weird to me as a software and a hardware guy to say, well, maybe they have took a lesser part here, or an older generation of this part in the CPU. I think this is not a knock on the a7. I know this sounds weird. I think it has all the power that it needs to do what it needs to do. But it might mean that they again made a slight change there. Now Sony is quite smart in this, that they always give they don't really give the CPU a name. They call it the Bionics processor, and they call it the LSI chip, and they leave it at that. So we will not know what they have done, and they might have done some of the changes that I just pointed out. So, do we have more to talk about? Well, let's see in the pictures if we can find more to talk about. Yeah, I think that this one is interesting. I just put it in there so that you can see how, I think it's magical, to be fair, how small this motherboard is. If you take away this part, it kind of gives me the same feeling if you are looking inside an iPhone, right? You see how small the motherboard is, and you can also see that the range of these cameras is quite small compared to the overall size. So that's kind of an interesting thing to notice. Yeah, I think I have one more picture. Well, let's talk a little bit about this one. So I'm also, and again, not saying it's true, but I am wondering about this. I'm wondering about the shutter, and why I'm wondering about this is when the a7r3 was released, they made quite a big point about that the shutter is a new design, and it was better for vibrations, and it had a higher or lower failure rate, so a higher rate between failures. I think it was rated at 500,000 shutter releases. I noticed that they are not talking about it now. So maybe they also put in a different shutter. I looked at the different pictures of the old and new one, and I can't really see any differences, but it doesn't mean that they are not there. So there might be something there again to reduce the price of the A7 versus the A7R III. Yeah, some people might find this interesting. I've not seen many Sony models with broken shutters, so I don't know. But I would not be surprised that once they are asked, that they will say that this has a or the A7R III and the A9 will have a higher shutter, especially the A7R III, because I think the A9 was already an older design, but the A7R III will have a newer, better shutter release mechanism than the A7 has. So this is the famous part with the holes in it that water might get in. That's interesting. So let's see if there's anything more that we can talk about here. Yeah, one thing that I was wondering about myself, and I guess if you're listening to this or still listening, yeah, you might also be interested in that. I was always wondering about these lugs. How are they secured and how does that fit? Is there any risks of, I would say, breaking off, but how are they kind of attached? And I noticed in this picture that there's a small slit in here, right? So basically what they do, they put it in the back of the camera and then slide the mechanism through. I think that's very interesting. That means that if it breaks, it really has to take this whole part kind of off. So that was an interesting detail. The other thing to point out here is you can see how well protected even the battery part is, right? It's kind of totally enclosed into this magnesium sort of frame. So that's well, interesting. Another part is here. You can see this small hole, which is basically for the lockdown for your HDMI. And again, you can see that I drilled it directly into the body. So yeah. So the last picture I want to show you was also, I'm trying to get the correct pictures which are, let's say, known entities. This morning when I was looking at some of these differences, I noticed one and I wasn't sure. I actually checked it. So I'm only showing you this picture because it's fake. So this is this picture. So this because we are getting so many very good, let's say, rumor pictures where people are photoshopping, that it was this was used in a video talking about the A7 III versus the A7R III, but this is actually not a picture of an A7R III. It's clearly one of the pictures made during the rumor time. And why did I know this? Because a7iii, they are using the old mount. Because the new mount, this mount, they improved it by putting in more screws, and they say that they beefed it up. And I noticed on this picture, like, whoa, hold on, there's only 4 screws there, which signaled to me, well, this is the old mount. And again, there's also a small change here. I had to really Google more and make sure that I was convincing myself that this is actually a fake picture of the A7 III because the new one does have the same mount that it has on this one. I'm not sure if we have proof here. Yeah, there we have the proof. You can see this is at the Sony event that it clearly has the 6 screws and the new sort of mounting structure. So that was one thing that they did not reduce. So it's you have to keep your eye on these things if you are interested in them. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea about what they are changing and why they are changing it and how they might have come to this reduction in price. So let's quickly revamp them. So revisit them. So the back part is different. So it doesn't have a magnesium back anymore, and it has plus and negative effects. For them, the plus effect for sure is that the price will be it's cheaper. It's just that simple. The EVF is different, so it has a lesser EVF. It also has a lesser display. I was trying to point to this one, but this is not display. But it has a lesser display at the back. I think it's perfect for video anyway, but for manual focus it will be less sharp because the EVF and the LCD is less sharp. I think it has, or we know it has lesser buffer memory, which makes sense because it needs to store less. I'm guessing that there's also some changes in, let's say, the configuration between the memory, the LSI and the CPU. Again, I am predicting that it might be lower clocked, or it might be an older part, an older version of the Bionic CPU. So we know this part, I forgot about this one, but on the new a7 III, it doesn't have this lock button anymore. Nobody knows why. I don't know. Most people didn't like this, so maybe they said, well, it will save us a few bucks and we don't have to, people complaining about it anyway. It seems that people didn't like it, so they removed it again. We don't really know why they did it. Yeah, so they removed the port from this side. So on the A9 there is an Ethernet port, on the a7r III there's a PC sync port, and on the A7 there's no port at all. So that's a small difference. Yeah, and next to that, of course, the obvious one. Well, there's maybe another one that's, sorry if I'm thinking out loud, maybe there's another hint that the shutter is different and the IBIS is different, because it also doesn't give us the high-res pixel shift mode, right? So there's not a small difference between these cameras, which I don't know, maybe it's a hint that indeed the shutter mechanism and the IBIS solution is not the same. So yeah, this is kind of the end of the video. If you have questions, just ask. Maybe I will make a new one again if we know more differences. Hopefully this video will be longer than probably the other ones that you watch about this topic, but we have pointed out the differences and kind of together guessed what they are doing and why they are doing it. Again, my gut feeling is that if you, I already talked about it in the previous video, I think the a7 III is for 70% of the people the best camera from Sony at the moment in the full frame range. I think it's a massive upgrade compared to the a7 II and a very good update. I think the a7r III is basically all about cropping. It's an okay video camera, it's quite a nice video camera, but if you really want to go for video, I suggest that the a7 is a better camera because of the test that Max already showed us. It has a newer sensor which seems to be half a stop to a stop better compared to the old best, let's say it like this. It has to downscale from a 6K image to a 4K image, which is good. So that means that if it's using the full frame, you get sharper video without any loss in let's say noise levels, which is yeah, what you want. It's also still quite good in crop mode. So I think in general the a7 III is a better video camera. I'm also, although nobody confirmed this yet to me, compared to the a7 II, they dropped, compared to all the old cameras, they dropped the apps from these cameras. So it's not on the a7, not on the a7r III, and not on the a9, and there's even more cameras where they dropped it. Now this is bad news, but it's also good news. The good news is that one of the complaints, if you watch my video, if you haven't seen it, go and watch it. I've made a small $30 hack and quite a few review videos about an external app called Field Monitor that you can use as an LCD in the flippy screen mode. So if you're coming from Canon or you want to use this camera for vlogging, go and watch this video. But there was one big downside on the old Sony cameras, is that because the way that the apps worked, it gets a bit technical, but the way that the apps worked, you had to start an application almost like on your phone to be able to use the external Wi-Fi controller. So in the new ones, they removed the app support. But as a consequence, they put the remote software so that you can use Wi-Fi into the core of the system. And as a side effect, that means that the new ones, and I'm sorry for the long introduction to this, on the old models you could not use picture profiles, so things like S-Log and X-Log 2 and 3, and even the new high dynamic range modes, you could not use that over your Wi-Fi connection. So it was kind of a pity, because we finally have, of course, sort of a nice solution and a cheap solution to have two monitors running at the same time, because if you use an external monitor on 4K, your screen will dim in 4K. Or will go out in 4K. But if you're using an external monitor, your phone as an external monitor, it is actually, you have both of your screens on, but it would not work with S-Log 2 or S-Log 3. Now, on the a7R3, I have confirmed this. That still works. You can use your picture profiles. And I'm 99% sure, I didn't confirm it yet. I asked several people at the Sony event. They didn't get back to me yet. I am 99% sure that it will also work on the a7 III. This again is another notch in that this is probably now the best video camera in the Sony range at the moment. So interesting. So this is really the end of the video. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I'm pretty sure. Well, if you dislike this video, I don't care. Well, I would say I don't care, but I'm interested in why you are doing it. My guess is because you think this video is too long. Yeah, well, that's what it is. I don't like to make short videos because then we can't talk about details. But if there's other reasons why you didn't like my video, then feel free to share them in a comment. So see you next time, and hopefully this will also get some, I wouldn't say high numbers, but people enjoyed also this one, because like I said, I was kind of surprised that my previous video got quite a few reactions. Well, maybe this will be helpful to somebody. Bye bye.